Jai Prabhuji. Hello everybody and welcome to our course of the book of Prabhuji, Kundalini Yoga, The Power is in You. This is the book and this is the foundation for all the details and all the things that we've been learning in regards to this path. Today we are going to continue with our series of classes in regards to the Svadhisthana Chakra, which is the second center, and the translation for this name will be the Sacral Chakra. We had the opportunity in our previous class to delve into different attributes, different properties that are related to this center, which are the desire, the pleasure, and the renunciation. And we were able to delve into these terms and familiarize ourselves with the attitude of the retroprogressive path with these specific terms. We finalized that class speaking that we are going to continue from what we share in regards to renunciation. We finalized this class listening to these beautiful words of Prabhuji, where he's sharing what is actually renunciation, and he was telling us that renunciation is a symptom of wisdom. This was his last words. And the title specific says renunciation is not an action. And it comes to tell us how this is a natural process. He's telling us this is not something that we can actually force. And he tells us don't do efforts to renounce, but do efforts to learn, do efforts to understand for Brahma Vidya, Yoga Vidya, practice, study, acquire wisdom. Because then when we actually know what's really valuable in life, then renunciation happens by itself. And for me, this is very connected to this paragraph, to this verse that we read from the Bhagavad Gita, where it's speaking about sublimation. It's speaking about this higher taste and how when we have this taste for the divine, something higher, then naturally things that we were attached, things from the world, material things, they lose their brightness. They lose whatever was providing us, whatever was keeping us and making us attached to that object, loses it when we have a taste for something higher. So I want us to continue from there by reading something from the book Ishavasya Upanishad commented by Prabhuji, where he keeps explaining about the renunciation, and from there we are going to delve and to explore into more terms, concepts that are related to the center, which are the sexuality, and we also spoke last time about sublimation. So we are going to continue from there, and then we're going to finalize this class by getting to know what are the deities and the Devis that are related with this center. So before we read what we find in the Ishavasya Upanishad in regards to the renunciation, I want us to read again this verse from the Bhagavad Gita so we know what is the connection between them. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina rasavajram rasopyapsya param drishtva nivartate. The objects of the senses leave one who abstains from them, but not the desire to enjoy them. However, even this desire is lost in one who has realized the Supreme. Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, verse 59. So just to remind ourselves to what we were speaking and how we finalize our previous class, we saw how the alternative that the Gita is providing us is not a repressing attitude, but more than repressing is a sublimation. When we have this higher taste, as we just spoke about, it's so easy, the same way that when we are in our childhood and then we go towards the adulthood stage, it happens naturally, organically. We are not forcing anything, we're not using violence. We respect this vow of the ahimsa, non-violence. So in the same way, when we have this higher taste, it is possible this sublimation and the renunciation happens by itself. Let's read what we find in the Ishavasya Upanishad commented by Prabhuji in regards to the renunciation. Many people might mistakenly think that renouncing means decreasing our capacity for happiness or enjoyment. Quite the contrary. Attachments impede bliss. All addictions hinder access to true happiness. Tena tyaktena vunjita means enjoy renouncing. Because every attachment brings an impurity that restricts our freedom. Only those who love shall discover the pleasure of renouncing. Only those who love animals will enjoy renouncing eating meat. Only those who love life will enjoy renouncing drugs. Only those who love other human beings will enjoy renouncing part of their bread to share it with the hungry. Only those who love us will be happy to sacrifice for our well-being. Without love, we only recognize pleasure when we receive or consume something. Only those who walk in love live in this world as contributors. Only love allows us to willingly renounce our personal enjoyment for the benefit of others. Only those who love enjoy effort, sacrifice, and renouncing. Only those who love God know the enjoyment of renouncing themselves and their selfishness. So we close this part of renunciation with these beautiful words from the Ishavasya Upanishad. It is always my recommendation to read the full mantra, at least, if not the whole book, in order to get a better picture of what we are sharing in this small extract. We are extracting it from the book to support what we're sharing in regards to renunciation, but I am sure that you will enjoy it even more as it's explaining here about enjoying renouncing. You see how it's very connected to this verse that we read about the Gita, this alternative, and everything that we've been sharing in our previous class. So let's continue with our topic in regards to the sexuality. But because what we're going to see is that the same as the first center, the second center is also related to the sexuality. We spoke about it. But the difference is that while the first center is more related to sexuality because of the procreation, we saw how this first center is, the Muladhara, is very related to survival. So we want to continue the species, the human being. So it's more related to procreation and this protection and this survival mechanism. It is instincts that we have. Then we saw how when the second center opens, we can actually feel pleasure and we can enjoy our possessions. And this is what's happening here with the sexuality. It's more, we're going to see that this chakra is a tantric center because it's more related to erotism, to pleasure, this is where the desire to be attractive and to be wanted, desired by the other, actually born. So we saw in our previous class how because this center is related to the water, it's prone to degradation. But we are going also to see here that, for example, an addiction to sex is a symptom of a blocked or closed center. So here we find the same attitude is telling us in the book. If you want to transcend this addiction for sexuality, don't repress it. Don't repress it blindly. Don't use violence, but focus on opening the center, because this addiction to sexuality, it's only a symptom of something that is not working properly. Something is imbalanced. So instead of putting efforts, as we spoke in renunciation, in the renunciation itself, in this case will be this addiction to sex, in repressing this natural desire, something that happens naturally, then instead of that, put your efforts in opening this center. So when it's working properly, this addiction to sex will fall by itself. Then the other things that we're going to see here is the fact that there are three possibilities, three views in regards to sexuality. And he's explaining here the one of the puritanical view, the libertine view, and the religious view. The puritanical view is a repressive view, the libertine is permissive, and the religious is by sublimation, this word that we are going to be deepening on today. So why the puritanical view is going to be repressive? Like, you remember when we were speaking about this contraction, this energy of closing. So it's going to make us neurotical and obsessive in regards to this. What happens when we want to repress something at certain point, we even explode. So this is going to be expressed as this neuroticism and obsession in regards to that we're trying to repress. We're speaking now about sexuality. The libertine one is a permissive one. You remember when we spoke about just surrendering ourselves to the desire of pleasure, going with it. What happens? We become slaves of this object of pleasure. That is giving us pleasure, we become slaves of it. So if we just surrender and we are permissive with this desire instead of understanding it, then we just become slaves of it. And then we have the religious view, which is by sublimation. What is telling us? Sublimation is observation without the interference, the intermission of the mind. When we observe the sexuality, even love is born from it. This is what is coming to tell us in regards to the sublimation. And as I just mentioned, it's telling us about this observation without the intermission of the mind. And I would like us to read specifically the words that we find in the book. Religion offers us sublimation as the only alternative to be free. Sublimation means observing without mentally interfering. Any attempt to transcend our weaknesses without observation or understanding will only be another type of blind repression. So first of all, thank you, gratefulness, because it's actually providing us an alternative to be free. What is this alternative? The observation without the intermission of the mind, and later we're going to see why it needs to be in this way. And it's telling us that any effort that we do to transcend our weaknesses will be impossible if we don't observe and understand that we're trying to transcend. And I want us to read another paragraph that we extract from the Ishavasya Upanishad, where we find more. We are supporting what we just read in regards to the observation. Observation, on the other hand, works in the opposite way as character cultivation. By observing our weaknesses, they begin to disappear. Defects are eradicated when illuminated with awareness. Trying to cultivate character, we strive to avoid making the same mistakes. However, in the absence of consciousness, even if we try to change, we will repeat our mistakes. As long as the information we possess about ourselves is nothing more than myths, legends, stories, dreams, and fantasies, change is impossible. Radical transformation is only feasible if we're able to observe our own defects and weaknesses. So here is giving us two directions. We can either focus in the weakness that we want to transcend, trying to repress it. This is one direction. And the other direction is observation. It's telling us here how the power of illuminating the weakness that we want to transcend, the power of awareness, it's going to dissolve the weakness itself. So here we have these two directions, and I am doing a very brief summary of what we just read, but as I always said, I recommend you to go and deepen into this topic if it's something that interests you. And for sure in this mantra, there are many other things that are spoke. This is the end of one of the mantras. So what I want us to do now is to keep deepening and delving into this term of the observation and how it's actually working as a healing for our weaknesses. And there is a article of Prabhuji in the book Experimenting with the Truth, where this is also brought in regards to the observation and how it's helping us to heal our weaknesses. So I want us also to read it to support what we've been speaking in regards to the sublimation of sexuality. In spiritual maturity, we no longer blame others for our emotions and behavior. Searching for excuses is the wrong direction and will keep us on the surface. If we looked inward instead of running after those we think are guilty of our misery, rage, bitterness, or anger, we will be able to find the origin of our pain. In this specific article, he's bringing different terms, and it's a different topic in regards to our image, in regards to the past, and this is why we're going to listen to these specific terms where he's telling us if we looked to our past. We are going to hear it in the next paragraph that I'm going to read. But I want us to focus specifically in the observation. Here he's saying, if we looked inward, it's using again the word look, watch, observe. Instead of focusing in something from the exterior, then we can actually find the origin of our pain. Something, this weakness, something that is causing us some pain, we are not going to find it by looking outwards, by trying to blame someone from the exterior or something, but by actually looking inwards. Let's continue reading. Our reactions stem from the past, from the image we have created. If we focus our attention on the past, we will become aware of the causes of our suffering. These wounds can be healed if we observe them attentively, as they are mere products of unconsciousness illusions, and dreams. So here is telling us more how this healing power of the awareness of the observation, these weaknesses, this pain, this suffering is only a consequence of illusions, of ignorance, of unconsciousness. So once you bring consciousness to those weaknesses, to something that maybe happened to you in the past, then the healing power of the observation can actually happen. We react from the dark corners of our unconsciousness. When we observe these corners, awareness acts like a healing power. In fact, the only thing that can liberate us from the past is awareness. Observing our unconsciousness until we liberate ourselves from the captivity of the past. So again, it's bringing this healing power of the awareness and how this is the only alternative for liberation, as we heard what we read from the Kundalini Yoga. The sublimation is the only alternative, this observation without the intermission of the mind. And in the next paragraph, we're going to actually understand more why it needs to be without the intermission of the mind. Like, in order for observation to actually happen, needs to be without this filter. And once we get to know even more in regards to the sexuality, we're going to share about another article that we find in the Experimenting with the Truth in regards to sexuality. We're also going to understand more about this intermission of the mind. When you experience sorrow, pain, jealousy, violence, or depression, look inward. As you penetrate your image, you go back in time. Do not do anything. Only observe attentively without reacting. If you judge, you will not be able to observe, because these feelings run to the unconscious when they are condemned. If your image feels accused, it will hide again. Assume the position of a witness and merely observe compassionately without interfering. I feel this paragraph is giving us so many keys, so many direction and guidance in order for the observation to actually happen, for meditation to happen, because the same as renunciation, the observation is not an action. It's something that happens. It's a revelation. And we just heard how when we judge, this is when the mind comes, like when it's not actually observation, there is an action of judging, then these feelings, whatever it is that you're judging, it will run to the unconscious, because nothing wants to be condemned. If we just relate this experience to ourselves, how do we feel when someone is condemning me? I want to hide. I don't want to receive this condemnation. I don't want to feel this judgment. And usually the reaction to this type of behavior is to hide. So the same happens with our feelings. When we are trying to observe, it needs to be without this intermission of the mind, this judge, someone that comes and say this is wrong, this is right. No. Put yourself in the position of the witness. So observation can actually happen, and this healing power of the awareness can actually happen. I remember one time one of these blessed darshans that we had with Prabhuji, where he was actually sharing about the same, how when we are in this process of observation, just to accept whatever comes, what is as it is, not to run to this judging, because we already heard what is it that is going to happen. It's going to run to the unconscious, it's going to try to hide. But what happens when we accept? We can actually allow ourselves to accept these feelings as they are, to see the things as they are. And then observation can actually happen, and the power of awareness can actually heal these weaknesses that we are observing and that we would like to transcend. And naturally, the sublimation, the transcendence of this weakness will happen by itself with the power of awareness. So I want us to finalize this part of the sexuality. We saw these different views, and we support the one of the or we are sharing the one of the sublimation of the religious view as the alternative. And the other thing that we are going to see is specifically in regards to the celibacy. This is a very interesting topic also in the path of spirituality, and we're going to see the article that we're going to share about very soon, how it's also related to the celibacy. There is a beautiful sentence in the book that is telling us that, like alchemy, authentic sublimation transforms sex in love. And then it's sharing with us in regards to the sannyasis. An authentic sannyasi cannot be born by the repression of sex. These sannyasis are monks that are accepting, monks or nuns that are accepting the vow of celibacy. So it's telling us that this is not born from mere repression, from blind repression of this sexuality, but on the opposite is by the sublimation of it, by the understanding of the sexuality. When we experience this authentic sublimation, as we just mentioned, then we understand that we don't depend on someone else, of someone from the exterior, for us to experience our sexuality. We no longer depend on someone else, but we experience it by ourselves. And it says that this is the pinnacle. The celibacy, it's actually the pinnacle of sexuality. But it's not by stifling it, but by actually realizing them. And it says that monks bloom like they are born from this sublimation and love. And it tells us that to sublimate our sexuality does not mean to destroy it, but to overcome the need for another person to experience it. And then it's finalized by telling us that the experience of our sexuality, when it's free of relationships or by the dependence of others, it's going to lead us to meditation. So I want us to finalize this part of the sexuality and the sublimation, sharing about the article that we find in the book Experimenting with the Truth. I want to show you the book for whoever doesn't know it. This is the book Experimenting with the Truth. It's a book of questions and answers. For seekers, it will be extremely interesting, but it's answering many basic questions that we have about life. So it's very recommended to read the whole book. Today we're going to be sharing about the article of sexuality. I want us to read the question. We're going to comment about them, and then we're going to read a small paragraph where Prabhuji is sharing about what is actually sex. I have heard you say that you do not consider sex to be an obstacle to spiritual development. On the other hand, there are others who view sex as the hindrance to self-realization. Many paths recommend celibacy or abstinence from sex. Could you clarify your position on sexuality in the spiritual process? So Prabhuji begins by sharing the first sentence of this article. Says that life is simple, but when we grasp it through the mind, it becomes complicated. Remember what we shared earlier in regards to the information of the mind, what happens when the mind comes to the picture. So he's telling us life is simple, but when we grasp it through the mind, it becomes complicated. When we don't actually live, but we are in our imagination, in our thoughts, in our fantasies. And he's putting the example of something as natural as eating. When we eat, this is not a hindrance for our spiritual development. On the contrary, this is a basic need, and we need to supply it. We need to satisfy it. It's even helpful at certain point in our path. We're going to have different paths where they are recommending a specific diet that is going to enhance our state. It's going to help us to create the conditions that we need in order for something of the divine to happen. We're going even to use the tool of the diet of eating in order to help us in our path. But what happens when there is this intermission of the mind? When the mind comes to the picture, we have transformed eating, a basic need, into a gastronomy, into different chefs, restaurants. We transform it as a means to pleasure, to enjoy, to find relief. And from there, we even have different diseases like bulimia, anorexia. We saw how the obesity, we saw it in this first center, how it's so related to certain imbalances. So this is what happens when we put something natural, something that it's inherent from ourselves, from human beings, but when we pass this through the filter of the mind, this is the result. And it's telling us how the mind is creating problems, and then it's trying to create solutions for the problem that she created. But there is obviously no solution because the mind itself is the problem. So then he's comparing it how the same way that eating is natural, the same way it is breathing, sleeping, and also sex. It's natural, but when we pass it through this filter of the mind, we saw in our previous class this process of the action. What happens when the sex was something pleasure and then I want to repeat it? We create from the sex this industry of the pornography, the prostitution, so many things around it. We create different fantasies and expectations in regards to sex, like there is someone perfect, the body is perfect, the person always desires to be with me, always wants to have sex with me, and it's not possible to actually satisfy all these fantasies. So for that problem that was created related to sex, we come up with different solutions like let's practice celibacy, let's do abstinence from sex. And he's sharing how many spiritual paths do not support, do not recommend the celibacy. So we see here that the problem is not sex itself, but our attitude towards it and how we use it. He says like sex can even be used to sublimate and to reach love. So it all depends on how what's our attitude, and this intermission of the mind, all these fantasies, all this imagination, everything that we project to something so natural as it is sex. So I want to finalize this part just by reading a small paragraph where he's sharing in regards to what is sex. As a natural act, sex is not an obstacle on the path to God. Like any obsession or mental demand, sex becomes a nuisance in the spiritual process only when we exaggerate its importance. But if we recognize that it is a natural phenomenon, it can manifest as love. I want us to stay with this paragraph, and even we can compare it with when we spoke about renunciation, and when we know the true value of things, then everything falls in place in the same way. When we don't exaggerate the importance of sex, it can actually even transform into love. Let's continue by sharing more properties in regards to the Svadhisthana chakra, and I would like us to begin by sharing the meaning of the name. The word Sva means itself, and Adhisthana means residence or abode. So, Svadhisthana will mean the place where the self dwells or resides, or the abode of the self. We see this very beautiful name for this center, the place where the self lives. We have other names that we can use in order to refer to this chakra. In the tantric terminology, refers to this chakra as Adhisthana, the abode. Also, it can be Vima, the terrible one, Shatpatra, the six-petal one, Shatpala which is the six-petal lotus, and Bari Chakra, the water chakra. We are going to find that in the Vedas and the Upanishad with the name Medra or Svadhisthana. Where is the Svadhisthana chakra located? This center, the second center, is going to be at the very base of the genitals. It's going to be close to the Muladhara and within the Shushumna Nadi. The Kshetram, which is this diagram that we're going to use in order to represent the center, it's going to be in the front of the body at the level of the pubic bone, and it's going to be just above the genitals. So different than the Muladhara that we saw that both the Kshetram and the location were in the same place. We see how here it varies a little bit, but they are both in this area of the genitals. But the Kshetram, as we mentioned in our introductory class to the chakras, these energy centers, they are going to be located in the front of the body. This one is just above the genitals. Now I want us to start sharing in regards to the deity that is presiding, or the Deva that is presiding in this center. And the one that rules the Svadhisthana chakra is Vishnu. We heard in our previous class that within the Trimurti, this Vedic triad, Brahma is the creator, Shiva is the destroyer, and Vishnu is the one that maintains the cosmic order. So it is very natural for Vishnu, this preserver aspect of God, to be the deity of this center that is related with sexuality, because without it, living beings are going to be extinct. So we see this connection, right, between this specific god of this triad that is related to preservation, and then we can see how it's going to be connected with this center, that it's also connected with sexuality in order for us to preserve the human beings. Also, something very interesting that we're going to see in regards to Vishnu is that we saw how Brahma, the fact that Brahma is going to occupy the first place in this Trimurti does not actually mean that Vishnu it's going to be secondary or inferior. We're going to see that according to many sacred scriptures like the Padma Purana, the Lord Vishnu is the principal deity because he is the one that divides himself into the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer. And we're also going to have different path of the Hinduism, like the Vaishnavism, that is going to consider Vishnu. We see the name of this path, Vaishnavism. It's coming from the name Vishnu. This specific path is going to consider Vishnu to be the supreme God. And we see Gaudiya Vaishnavism, that it's actually considering Lord Krishna to be the supreme divinity, and it's the origin of Lord Vishnu. So Lord Vishnu, it's also known as Mahavishnu, and this is going to represent the Sattva Guna, this modality of benevolence or goodness. And his name means omnipresent, as he is both immanent and transcendent reality. Another common name of Vishnu is going to be Narayana, and this name means he who has made the hearts of human beings his abode. When we relate to Vishnu as this deity that lives in us, then his name is going to be that lives in our hearts. His name is going to be Narayana. We are going to start seeing different images of Vishnu, and he has his bed is going to be the serpent Sesha or Ananta, which is floating over the waters of the ocean of milk, or it's also called the Koshal Ocean, called Kshira Samudra. Then Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, is gently massaging his sacred lotus feet. And we see how from his navel a lotus flower is growing, which is Brahma, which is the creator of the universe. We saw in our previous class of the Muladhara Chakra when we spoke about Brahma, which is the deity that is presiding the first center. We shared how Brahma is born from the lotus flower that is growing from the navel of Vishnu, and we can see here in these different images how it is depicted. It's a very famous image, so in case someone didn't know what it was representing, then we see that it's Vishnu. His skin is dark. It's a dark shade of blue, so it's like the rain cloud. This is why he's also described as Nila Mega Shyama. He's also carrying a garland which is called Vaijayanti, and it's representing the subtle elements or the Buddha Tammatras. His omnipresence that we just mentioned, it's going to be represented by his 4 arms, and they are symbolizing the 4 cardinal points. Then his arms are holding one of them a lotus flower, which is Padma. We are already familiar with this term. A conch shell, which is Shankha. A disc, a Chakra. And a golden club, which is a Gada. The lotus flower is symbolizing the evolution and the development of the universe. The seashell is symbolizing the 5 elements or the Panchabhuta. The disc is going to represent the cosmic mind, and the club is representing the cosmic intellect. The vehicle of this god of Vishnu is the loyal Garuda. We're going to see images of him also. He is the god of birds. Then we have 6 divine glories that are attributed to Vishnu, which are knowledge or jnana, the mystic powers, which are Aishvarya, the potency, Shakti, the power, Bala, the virility, which is Vyarya, and the radiance, which is going to be called as Tejas. We saw that Tejas is also, we refer to fire like Tejas. So now we can share about the goddess or the Devi of the center, which is Rakini. Rakini is seated on a double lotus. She's also blue like Vishnu, and she has 3 red eyes. She is heavily bejeweled, like full of jewelry and different beautiful ornaments. And he has like a pretending teeth that it's giving her like a ferocious appearance. Then she has 4 hands, and she's holding a hatchet, a trident, a lotus flower, and a drum. She is also the goddess of vegetable world, which is suggesting that in order for us to transcend this center, then we need to practice vegetarianism. We're going to see after in our section of the sadhana how the vegetarianism is also something that is recommended in the path of the Kundalini in order to continue developing in the path. This is everything that we're going to share for today. We are going to have our next class where we are going to keep deepening into different attributes and properties in regards to the Svadhisthana chakra. As always, thank you very much for the time you invest on listening to these classes. Jai Prabhuji.